Hello, my friends. How are you doing today? I'm sure you're all doing lovely. um, I hope you. We just did a video yesterday. I think you really a lot of people will really enjoy. If you've come from religion, it was a lot to do with we don't. There's no burning in hell, or it's based on the hell principle of the Bible and how actually Scripture doesn't even really teach it. So it's a really cool video, and I think it would help a lot of people with some anxieties and such, which kind of leads us into this video that we're doing today about alleviating anxieties and removing the Gehenna from our life. Part of the way we're going to express that today is through I did my personal testimony 2 days ago. I believe it was in that video, was it not?
It was 2 videos ago.
2 videos ago. You can go down and check it out. You can see my little journey. But today, to express this topic, we're going to go into Sharon's testimony, and then we're going to discuss some scripture that can kind of show us how, almost like a lack of effort, that something can be produced in us, that we express love and burn away the anxieties and fears in our life. So, Sharon, I'm very interested. I haven't even really heard the full testimonial thing from you, so I'm on the edge of my seat. Have at her.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I'm going to try to make this as short as possible, but my heart is full when I think about where I've come from to where I am today. It's such a huge contrast. So let me begin in, I guess, the best place for me to begin is what led me to search for God in the first place. I'm from Jamaica originally and had moved to New York. I was a single mom in 1991. I had 2 daughters, no support, child support or government support. So I was doing it all alone. And you can imagine from that, I had a lot of struggles, evictions, just very taxing, trying, stressful situations in my life. Then living in New York, moving from one apartment to the next for lack of money and all of that, I was somehow in 1991 able to acquire a 1-bedroom condominium for me and my 2 daughters. And at that time, I felt like I won the lottery. I mean, I could have won millions of dollars and it would not have made me happier. I was so happy and felt so grateful, but I didn't know who to show gratitude to. So I thought it must be God that has helped me to come to this place where I have this 1-bedroom apartment or condominium it was, for me and my children, so I don't have to be struggling and moving as much as we had in the past. So I made a commitment. The day I moved into that condominium, I made a commitment to find the God who helped me to get here and to serve him, to thank him. I literally wanted to hug God and say thank you because I felt so much gratitude. But what happened after that was I didn't know where to turn. I had all these lovely feelings, but didn't know where to place them. I was raised in a Catholic church, but that, as I grew older, that didn't appeal to me, and I didn't know where to turn, but I had that desire. Anyway, shortly thereafter, I met the missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And over the next 3 months, they taught me their missionary lessons, and I struggled in the beginning, but I prayed like I never prayed before throughout that 3-month period. And I won't get into the details in this video, but a miracle of sorts brought me to the knowledge, or at that time, that this is what I needed to do, that this making the decision to join this church was what I needed to do. And so I did. And I felt very confident and comfortable that I found the place where I could be, where I would find the God that I wanted to hug and say thank you to. But what happened after that, and by the way, I spent 21 years as a stalwart member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But somewhere along that path, I lost the strong urge to find God and kind of settled into the routine of being a Latter-day Saint Christian, and the zeal for God was subdued somewhat and turned into more of a just accepting what the teachings of this religion presented. And I did that until after 21 years, I was offered the opportunity to become a Sunday school teacher. And when I was asked to do that, I didn't feel qualified because I didn't really know the scriptures very well. So I committed to studying the scriptures and coming to know the renewal of this original desire that I had came back up in me. And I again felt that I wanted to know God well enough that I could really teach. It was 15-year-olds at the time what God is or who God is. So I took 2 years off from life, more or less. I cut out entertainment, television, radio, media of all kinds, and devoted myself to studying the Bible, the Book of Mormon, all the books of the LDS Church, including the King James Version of the Bible. And after 2 years of doing that, surprisingly, I separated myself from the church. But not just from the church, I separated myself from religious organizations in general. Because what happened over that 2 years, it surprised me, but I started to open up to a brand new understanding of life. And I wrote some words down that resulted from this new experience I was having. But before I use those words, let me just tell you one of the biggest issues that I had when I was, in the organized religion is the judgment that I felt of others. I would judge people, as we talked about in our last videos. I would decide who should or would be going to hell and who was worthy of going to heaven. And that was never a good feeling, but I didn't know how to overcome that, while I was in Christianity. And one of the things I regretted the most over that period of time was how I treated my youngest daughter, who was rebellious. She wanted nothing to do with the church. When she turned 13 years old, she decided this was not for her and did everything opposite to what, we taught in church. And I gave her a very hard time for that. I said things to her and thought about her in a way that made her depressed. And I regret that. I was completely judgmental. I felt in my heart that she was going to go to hell, so to speak. In the Mormon church, it's not so much of hell. They call it a celestial kingdom, which is the lowest kingdom of heaven. And that's where I thought my daughter was going. And that judgment fell away in my 2-year, study. And then from there to where I am now, and I'm wrapping it up by saying this, here's where I am now. I feel so much clarity about life. This oneness, the message of oneness that has um, that has come up in me, the understanding that we are all literally one being. Knowing that my daughter and I are one. She's in me and I'm in her. So as the Bible puts it, the freedom that I have, the feeling of satisfaction and clarity and security, this is basically my testimony. That coming from a place of complete judgment to a place of you could say love and freedom is worth every bit of the 21 years that I spent in the LDS church. So I don't know if I want to end here because I feel like I've been going on too long, but I think that is the core of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, if we watch the one that I did, you'll see a lot of parallels there. One thing I didn't mention in mine was I had a stepdaughter who I did much the same to. She doesn't talk to me to this day. So it's, yeah, it was a judgment and all of those things like that. To me, came from anxieties. And the testimony both of us mirrored was that this understanding of oneness, of the oneness of all, burns away those anxieties. I don't have judgment for people anymore. I have nothing but love and compassion, if anything. Judgments turn to compassion, to empathy, of being able to identify if someone is struggling in one area with me as that person as well, because I've been there. It's the mind of me as well. I'm that struggle. I'm all of those things. I've been there in mind, regardless. So identifying with people and having compassion for people through this breaks a lot of the struggles. I used to say things like, well, if this person wasn't in my life, or if this person would change, then I would be all right. Or if this job or boss or whatever, then I wouldn't be like this. So the justification of the unloving action was just a deflection of the pain and anxiety that I was going through because of the lack of remembrance of the oneness of what we are. And now that I have this knowledge, I've just had some episodes in my life come up recently where I consistently had to remind myself of the oneness of all of us to kind of put the compass back. Does the compass move over left and right? And yesterday's video, when we talked about damnation but we realized it was talking about Gehennas that we're going through right now, really spoke to this here, where the oneness understanding you said the verse keeps us on the narrow path. Did you have that verse? Were we going to talk about that verse, or we can just mention?
You can talk about it.
Most people, even people that don't know the Bible, know that one. That verse is Jesus said to stay on the narrow path. He said that a couple times. And there's a couple of viewpoints of that, but almost everybody knows it, the narrow path.
Right.
And I don't think we need to bring the verse up, but that narrow path, depending on how you look at it, it's hard to watch to say I'm on the narrow path without judging what is not the narrow path. Everything outside that narrow path then means that they are on the wrong, being bad, doing the wrong thing. That if it's the wrong thing for me, then they are on the unnarrow path. And the consequences of that, depending on what your mind has not remembered, can cause us a lot of anxiety, uh, terrible anxiety. So we're going to go into some scriptures now that can readjust the compass so that, I mean, if you feel like you're judging other people or have been judged by other people, or if you have anxieties, we say things like, oh, if that person makes me angry, or I'm afraid of that person, or all of these things that can cause us to be not in peace and love and kindness and all of those things like that. We have some verses that can help us get that compass back to where we live in this consistently. And where were we starting there, Shan?
I think I'm going to start with Galatians 5:22 and 23. I
Yeah.
talked about judgment in my testimony a minute ago, and how that made me feel. I was not comfortable having to judge someone as going to hell. And it says in Matthew 7, verse 1, judge not. It says it plainly, judge not that you be not judged. And I believe a lot of people understand that scripture. But the one I want to read now is the fruits, a scripture that talks about the fruits of the Spirit. And by fruits, what would be a word that you would use to replace fruits? The product of having this knowledge of oneness.
Right. Yeah.
Okay,
I'll
that's
expound
probably
upon that. I'll expound upon that in the next verse that we're going to talk about.
okay.
The
Now,
action of this.
right, and tying that into staying on the straight and narrow path, the straight and narrow path, as this oneness has taught me, is the path of your own personal feeling of joy, love, peace, satisfaction, well-being. So I'm going to read Galatians 5:22 and 23. It says, the fruits of the Spirit, and in other words, the result of being on this oneness path is joy, is love, joy, peace, long suffering, and that we'd have to explain that in another video. Gentleness, goodness, meekness, temperance, all these lovely feelings that I don't know of another way to get all these feelings of joy and peace and goodness and meekness outside of knowing that you and everyone else are one and the same.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so basically that is how I know I am on the straight and narrow path. How I know when I've gone off the straight path is when I start to feel any feeling of anger or resentment or stress or
Yes.
anxiety.
Yes.
That's how I know I'm off the path. But as Steve says, we have a little navigator or compass within us called the oneness spirit, I guess, the spirit of Christ. That is the navigator. It takes us back when we've gone off course. It brings us back onto the path of peace and love and joy, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That's beautiful. And by the way, I've read quite a bit about every pretty much religion out there. And I mean, not to extent a lot of people have, but one thing I do know is the spirit of Christ, or the Christ spirit, is is threaded through all that I've ever read. It's there. It may not be speaking of Jesus exactly, but the Christ concept is threaded through almost all religion. So the spirit of Christ is a wonderful thing. And yeah, and now I'll take that from another verse, Matthew 7:15 to 20, where Jesus is talking about, because people were wondering about false prophets or teachers or what have you. And you could even say, not even the prophet, when he talks about this, you could say thought process, actually, because when the mind speaks from other consciousness, it creates thought processes, and that can come. You can be your own prophet in your own consciousness, right? So we can speak from that perspective of what we tell ourselves, not just from hearing what other people are saying. It's this teaching, wherever the teaching has come from. Beware of false prophets. It's funny, beware almost sounds like they're trying to scare you right off the get-go. It's not. It's not a fear mechanism. Who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. Now, I'll say a little bit this. The ravenous wolves is disturbed. People like being disturbed. When we talk about anxiety and all of that, it's our disturbances within us. So you will know them by their fruits. Now, what does fruits mean? This will kind of explain it as we go through. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Do we go grab our teaching where it hurts? Where, when we get it, when we put our hand in to grab a grape, do we put our hand right in the thorn bush so it scratches, and then do we do it back again? No, we don't. Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore, by their fruits you will know them. I like to look at these as thoughts, because the thoughts come from the mind, from the other consciousness. So this is to explain fruits. It's in the Bible, the tree is most notably symbolized as knowledge or belief. Tree of good and evil, right? It's the believing in one or the other, the belief in our mind. So he said a good tree will only bear good fruit. Well, what happens? Fruit is produced from a tree. The knowledge, the belief can't go against what it's going to produce. So if it produces anxiety, your actions are going to be anxious. Your actions are going to be anger. Your actions are going to be this. Now, if you're seeing these within yourself, and we know, because these things will remind us that we don't want to be like this. I don't know about you, but talking about my testimony, I don't know how many times I woke up in the morning and said, okay, I'm not going to be like this today, only to be like that today. Because my belief would not produce anything else. You said about judgment, you didn't want to judge people, but your belief could not allow you to do anything but. If we believe that people are going to go to some hell or are going to be judged by some other mind, then we're going to have actions that show that. We're going to be judgmental. We're going to be angry towards people because we're going to be afraid for them and have fear in our lives. So if we're having fears, anxiety, these are fruits of bad trees. So go back to our belief. Our belief, there's something incorrect about our belief. What Jesus is saying here is the truth is what produces what we were created to be: joyful, loving, grace, all of the wonderful things that make life beautiful for ourselves. We are not in our true mind anxious. We didn't create ourselves to be that.
Be that way.
See?
That's true.
Yeah. So this is a wonderful news, because we can say, well, why am I so fearful, or why am I so anxious? We go back to the oneness message, and I exalt you before we can take this too far. In fact, I'm going to segue this there's one thing Jesus also says is we can turn the other cheek and love our enemies and all of these things like that. We won't have to have vengeance on people. We won't have vengeance on people. We just won't do it. Now, does that make us a doorstop or something doormat to get? Do we just allow people to hurt us and all of those things? We're going to get into that in our next video. But just a little hint, no. But we'll get into that in our next video. But what we will do is live a life without all of these anxieties, in the truth that we are all one. I'm you, you are me, we are we, everything. And as
Yeah.
our Christ told us that we treat others as we treat ourselves. Why? Because they are us and we are them.
Yes.
And this love is produced through this message.
Well said. I couldn't have put it better, Steve. And you mentioned the fruit that comes from that tree. And I know when I was, before I came to understand this oneness, I used to look at people's outward actions and consider their fruit in that way. For example, if someone was dressed nicely, maybe a suit and tie, I would judge their fruit differently from someone who was dressed maybe like a homeless person, or not as well put together. If someone was charitable, gave to charity, I would consider that good fruit. But the truth is, the fruit that's referred to here, as we understand it in the oneness message, is the fruit of your own well-being. How the fruit of your own mental state. How
Peace.
is That's the fruit.
Yeah.
That's what you use to judge the good fruit.
Yeah. And
Okay?
that comes out in action as
And
well.
it will come out in action, but because we're forgetful and sometimes we act in disobedience to the oneness, we act contrary. It's not fair to judge someone purely on their action. You have to almost be empathetic
Mm-hmm.
and come to know that person. First of all, come to know yourself, because when you come to know yourself, you're literally coming to know everyone else, because you are everyone else. But that's a topic for another
Yeah, I
deeper
think another one
discussion.
will be, we'll have to go into empathy, maybe the one after that. But
Right.
empathy is, uh, I feel great empathy now, compassion for others that may be struggling in whatever way my mind might come to. And by no means do I feel greater than or better than or anything of that nature anymore. Occasionally it might slip in, of course, but I have a belief now. I love the idea of compass that can that I can remind myself, and it will spend some time in meditation or whatever on that understanding, and it just seems to melt away. So we do this for those that we feel empathy with, and about if you're having anxiety problems, uh, panic, all of those things like that. This message, from what I've gathered and from what I've seen from those that have followed it, that to a person, it does alleviate that. And tomorrow we're going to get into not being a doormat. Uh, how how sometimes loving the other consciousness in our life means not being part of their life, and all of those things like that. So that'll be our message for tomorrow. Anyways, I think we better head out here. This has been all we. I think this is all we need to put forth today. Uh, Hit the subscribe and the bell. Let's get this message out to the world, out there, to all the other consciousness. Comment in the bottom if you're appreciating this message or not appreciating it, or whatever you want in that way. But increasing this algorithm into our YouTube universe also increases it into the whole of the mind. So please feel free to hit that like and subscribe. Have a great day. So,
Okay.
lots
Bye.
of love to you.